For the record, this is the Senate Judiciary and Public Safety Committee. Today's date is January 25th, 2021. Today's agenda will be to hear Senator Rosen Senate File number 7. And we're still waiting for a few members, but we're going to continue and let the record show that we do have quorum. Senator Rosen, would you like to start describing your bill?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much.
I can't hear you, Senator Rosen. Maybe it's my computer.
Can everybody else hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay.
Oh, now I can hear you all just fine. So
that'd be bad when the chair can't hear me. That's bad. Okay.
What did you say?
I said that'd be bad.
Kidding.
Okay. Okay. This is my first bill, Mr. Chair, under Zoom like this. So
But we want to welcome you to the Judiciary Committee.
yes, right. It's always a scary one to start off the year with. I have before you, Mr. Chair, and committee members, Senate File 7, which is the Disaster Contingency Account, the DACA account. It's a very simple bill. Under current law, the definition of disaster reads and means that any catastrophe, and I'm reading straight from the bill, means any catastrophe, including but not limited to a tornado, storm, high water, wind-driven water, tidal wave, earthquake, volcanic eruption, landslide, mudslide, snowstorm, or drought, or regardless of cause, any fire, flood, or explosion, regardless of the cause. And I want to make sure that we understand, regardless of the cause. So Senate File 7 restricts the definition of a state declared disasters to exclude civil unrest. And it has a retroactive date of January 1st of 2020. So I'd like to go through, Mr. Chair, members, just kind of a brief history of DACA. For those of you that are not familiar with it or haven't experienced it, and hopefully you haven't had a disaster in your communities, but it is something that was thought through by Senator Dick Cohen and Representative Gene Pawlowski, who is also going to be the House author of Senate File 7. And he was, and those two were the chief author of the DACA legislation. And it all stemmed, and just talking with Representative Pawlowski, it stemmed back in 2007 with those terrible floods in southeast Minnesota in Rushford. So Chapter 12A was brought forward, which is the federal delegation. And that is 12A-01 reads, this chapter provides a framework and procedures for state agencies to assist communities to recover from a natural disaster for areas in Minnesota that are included in a presidential declaration of major disaster. The feds reimburse 75 cents on the dollar, and that is, again, for public infrastructure damage caused by tidal waves, earthquakes, fire, flood, and explosion. And that is, basically what the bill does. Chapter 12B, which this Senate File 7 is all about, which is deals with the state share. And that was developed in 2014. And the goal of 12B, which 12B-10, it says, this deals with the public disaster assistance absent of federal aid. And this chapter establishes a state public assistance program to provide cost share assistance to local governments that sustain significant damage on a per capita basis, but are not eligible for federal disaster assistance or corresponding state assistance under Chapter 12A, which again is the federal assistance part of it. And the goal of 12B was to get the aid out to the community as fast as possible, because there's very few local units of government that can handle a natural disaster. It also, number two, eliminated the potential political mess that can happen when there is a special session. And you can imagine, if you haven't lived through one of these, which Mr. Chair, you have many times, and Senator Pappas and Senator Ingebrigtsen have lived through these many times. You can imagine the pile-on that happens when there's even a talk about a special session. So this eliminated the partisanship between the legislative branch and the governor. And also, whenever there was a special session that was called for a disaster, there was a tendency to over-appropriate money and kind of, not necessarily pad the books, but basically make sure that everything was accounted for. And this tended to see a cancellation of money at the end. So the intent of 12B, after talking with Representative Pulowski, was this fund was to be used for natural occurring disasters. And Hennepin and Ramsey applied under the Stafford Disaster Relief Emergency Assistant Account, which is basically FEMA's rule of thumb. And Governor Walt's letter to President Trump on July 2nd of 2020 request that you declare a major disaster for the state of Minnesota because of extensive fire damage to public infrastructure caused by the civil unrest, unquote. This did not receive a federal declaration. And Director Joe Kelly, I know, was first on the list to testify, and he can perhaps explain why it did not receive a federal declaration. But under 12B.25, federal disaster assistance is not available to the applicant because, as I said, number one, the governor did not request a presidential declaration of major disaster, which did not happen. Our governor did. Number two, the president denied the governor's request, which did happen in Minnesota. Or number three, the applicant is not eligible for federal disaster assistance because the state or county did not meet the per capita impact indicator under FEMA Public Assistance Program. So because there was no federal declaration, Governor Walz declared a state disaster and therefore can't appropriate from the DACA. Under current law, every biennium in a budget year, the governor is required to tell how much he needs for the next 2 years in the DACA account. And that request will be coming out tomorrow. This is placed in a DPS account for the federal match and the state share. By Governor Walz declaring a state disaster, the balance in the DACA is insufficient to meet needs. A recent memorandum from MMB addressed January 15th of 2021 states the expense request for Hennepin for damages caused by fires during civil unrest between May 27th and June 3rd of 2020 is $15.658 million. Of that, $12.024 million has been placed in a sub-account with DPS. And the next 30 to 60 days will begin reimbursements to the county and the city. Just as a reminder, in 2019, there was 20 million that was put into the DACA account, and in 2020, 30 million for disasters, as I read in the bill, which means catastrophe, including but not limited to tornadoes, stormwater, landslides, mudslides, fire, flood, and explosion, on and on. The balance in the account now is $3.848 million. And I'm here, members, to debate the use of the DACA funds and what the bill is intended to be used for, to clarify its intended purpose for natural disasters. And by the governor using the DACA account to basically usurp our authority as a legislature and have the right to debate the appropriateness of this expense. With that, Mr. Chair, I will stand for questions, and I see you have some testifiers.
Senator Rosen, I'm going to move directly into our testifiers, and then if I could ask the members to just hold questions until we're done. We have 5 individuals that wanted to speak, so if we could do that, I'd like to move directly to Director Joe Kelly from Homeland Security. Director Kelly, welcome to the committee. Would you identify yourself for the record?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Yes, my name is Joe Kelly, and I am the State Emergency Management Director with the Minnesota Department of Public Safety.
Please proceed.
Mr. Chair and members, excuse me, I would like to walk through very briefly kind of a recounting of the process, although Senator Rosen laid it out very accurately, but just a little bit more on the process that we went through that resulted in the authorization of state disaster assistance to Hennepin County and applicants within the city of Minneapolis for for damages caused by the fires during the civil unrest. And then I would just like to share some concerns and issues with what's proposed under Senate File 7, being completely respectful of the legislature's interest in discussing these changes. We all know that the incident occurred starting at the end of May and for a few days into June. The unrest caused significant damage to the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul and other parts of both Hennepin and Ramsey counties. And a lot of that damage, of course, was caused by fire. The local governments, working specifically through Hennepin and Ramsey County, submitted their initial damage assessments. And based on that, we described the situation to FEMA and asked them to come to Minnesota to conduct what we call a joint damage assessment. So they did that from FEMA, they did it virtually, but we had people from the federal government, state government, the two counties, and multiple cities sit down and jointly go through the damage and the documentation thereof. They completed a formal document, which we call a Table A. I apologize for the bureaucracy, but the Table A verifies, and it's a FEMA document. It verifies and documents that these damages in these amounts and these categories are what is eligible for federal disaster assistance. And it was based on that Table A that we based Governor Walz's request that he sent through FEMA to the president. And I would point out that, and repeat what Senator Rosen said, that the damages that we requested are very narrow. And this is a bit of a follow-up to Senator Ingebretsen's question from the last committee meeting. They are damages that relate directly to public infrastructure damage and public response costs caused by fire. Nothing else is in there because FEMA was extremely focused on maintaining a very tight band of expenses that would be eligible under the Stafford Act. We submitted the governor's request, as Senator Rosen said. The president denied it. And here, I guess I would remind members that all emergency and major disaster declarations in the end are at the sole discretion of the President of the United States. States make those requests, they route them through FEMA, they're presented to the president, and it's the president's decision whether federal disaster assistance is going to be allocated. In this case, as we all know, the president denied that request. We submitted an appeal following the Code of Federal Regulations and the rules associated with constructing and submitting an appeal. And again, the president denied the request. And as Senator Rosen so aptly pointed out, that makes it eligible under Chapter 12B, Section .25. And I would just reiterate that it's not just the denial that makes it eligible, but the costs also have to be eligible under the Stafford Act. So the issue was not one where the denial was, hey, you're asking for things that we are not interested in reimbursing and helping states with. It was that it was denied. So I can tell you, having worked with FEMA very closely through about 12 federal disaster declarations over the last 10 years, they will not put anything in the Table A if it is not eligible for FEMA reimbursement. We wrestle with them every single time that we ask for federal assistance over the interpretation of what is eligible and what's not. So the president denied it. That makes it eligible, as Senator Rosen explained, and we prepared the necessary recommendation or documentation. And I made a recommendation to Governor Walz following Chapter 12B that he authorized disaster assistance for this incident. As members know, the governor authorized that financial aid, that disaster assistance, and we are now in the process of working with local applicants for reimbursement. I guess I would just highlight a couple of things to, if I can find it quickly. Just again, the types of structures and costs that are associated with this. They included a Hennepin County Library, clinic, human services building, as well as the MPD's 3rd Precinct building. There are also other eligible costs, such as the cost of removing the debris from the street in the areas of the fire, repairing traffic semaphores, streetlights, and some damage to vehicles that were involved in the response to the fire. So again, a very narrow band for what FEMA would consider eligible. Mr. Chair, are there any specific questions about the process at this point in time that committee members may have before I go to my issues and concerns?
Director Kelly, I think what we'll do is hear from all of our testifiers, and if you could stay on the line and be available for questions a little later, that would be welcome.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Next person, Judson Freed. I didn't see him on the screen, but perhaps I'm missing him. Is Mr. Freed on the line? Mr. Freed? Apparently he's not on the line. We'll move, maybe he'll join us later. Eric Waggy, Director, Emergency Management for Hennepin County. Director Waggy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Committee. Before you begin, could you identify yourself for the record?
Yes, sir. My name is Eric Waggy. I'm the Emergency Management Director for Hennepin County.
You're coming in clear. Please proceed.
Great, thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking the legislature for the support shown to local emergency management and particularly Hennepin County in our disaster responses in the past. And I believe we have an effective state disaster assistance program that has been very consistent and reliably a provider of critical aid to local governments in their hour of need. So appreciate all that's been done. I also appreciate the opportunity to provide remarks regarding the proposed changes to the statute 12B, and particularly the definition of disaster. This proposal would change Minnesota's definition of a major disaster to one that's narrower and more restrictive than the one that the federal government uses in the Stafford Act. And because of that difference, I think it would be disruptive to disaster recovery in my county and the rest of the state. The Stafford Act is what the federal government uses to send disaster relief to all states and local jurisdictions across the country. And the president has 3 routes to select from when he or she is considering a disaster declaration. Those are major disasters, emergencies, and fire assistance. And we're here really to discuss the major disaster, which is the recovery that occurs afterwards, largely from a disaster. The Stafford Act is particularly important in Minnesota because it's also serves as the foundation, basically the structure of our own state disaster assistance process. So both Minnesota statutes 12A and 12B are able to work because the applicant counties are required to use the Stafford Act processes for their quest for a major disaster declaration. So if anyone is going to employ the Minnesota statutes 12A or 12B, it rests on the federal formulas for eligibility, the governor's directive to do a preliminary damage assessment using the formula or the procedures found in the Stafford Act, the governor's request, the president's decision to approve or deny are all based on Stafford Act criteria. So the bulk of Minnesota's procedures are therefore actually the federal ones. And a big reason why 12A and 12B are just a few pages thick is that the Stafford Act carries the administrative load of the rules and regulations in its hundreds of pages. And that's what we all really turn to use that. So the Stafford Act really begins at the same place, and that's a common definition of what a disaster is. So it is true that Stafford Act is strongly oriented toward natural disasters because natural disasters don't have a responsible party. There's nobody that they can really go after for funding if an accident should occur. So there's really not a lot of resources out there to do that. And also a lot of natural hazards can be insured. But the Act also defines disasters as eligible for federal support that are not exclusively natural. And those are, we've noted, floods, fires, and explosions. So this has meant that Oklahoma City, Boston Marathon, the fertilizer explosion, a plant explosion in West Texas, and the Los Angeles riots were all covered under Stafford Act rules. So really the ability of places to get disaster relief depends on this inclusive federal definition. And if Minnesota forges out with a different definition than the one that the federal government uses, there might be friction about the process. So really what that would happen is it increased the uncertainty of a state disaster assistance for local governments that face threats of civil unrest. The new wording could also confuse relief efforts under our own Chapter 12A, because 12A is really a 25% match for federal declarations that's already occurred. So if we're not covering it in 12B, then does that spill over into 12A? That kind of stuff would have to be determined. It also might negatively affect the president's decision to provide federal relief to the state following a civil unrest, because the state excludes that from its own definition of a disaster. And they want to ensure that the state is applying full resources to addressing those issues. It would also complicate the administration of Chapter 12A and 12B, since some of the policies that we've already noted and procedures follow the Stafford Act. So then we'd have to go in and specifically exclude or modify policies and procedures for our own state internal processes, which would tend to slow things down. Finally, since our strong and effective voluntary organizations and charitable relief organizations expect some forms of reimbursement when possible through the Stafford Act, if we remove that from our rule book, there could be some question among those agencies whether they would be reimbursed when performing relief for civil disturbance efforts, because it wouldn't be written in as it is currently. So that would tend to discourage them. And it's just, it's easier to keep this act as an intact Stafford, essentially a Stafford compliant rule, rather than begin to craft other policies. And this may eventually open the door to other changes. So I know that I just wanted to be brief. I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to speak on the issue, Mr. Chair and committee members. And I know that there's a lot of factors involved in creating laws, but I just urge all of you to carefully evaluate the effects that separating Minnesota's definition of a disaster from the federal one could have on our effective disaster management program. So with that, I'll close, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wagi. And Director, if you could stay around for questions, we'd greatly appreciate it at the end of our list of testifiers. And Senator Kittmeyer, I know your hand is up, but if you could hold your question, that would be great. Mr. Barrett Lane, Director, Office of Emergency Management. Director Lane, welcome to the committee. Would you identify yourself before you begin?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Barrett, B-A-R-R-E-T, Lane, L-A-N-E. I am the Director of the Office of Emergency Management for the City of Minneapolis.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to address all of you today on this important topic. I want to thank you for the support that you've shown to Minnesota as a whole, the City of Minneapolis over the years. And I want to take this opportunity, since my partners are on the call as well, just to recognize the partnership that the City of Minneapolis has with Hennepin County and the state of Minnesota in protecting our citizens as we work through that mitigation, prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery cycle of emergency management. So my thanks to you and to them. Since the inception of this assistance program, reimbursements have sought to offset costs related to unforeseen and sometimes unprecedented events. And in the case of the unrest in June and the subsequent damages to the city infrastructure, the City of Minneapolis went through the required steps to apply for assistance, which was ultimately granted. We are now in the process of submitting the documentation for allowable reimbursements incurred to the state. And I wanted to really dovetail my presentation with the higher level presentation that Director Kelly gave and give you a little bit of a practitioner's view of how this is working on the ground. Obviously, the changes sought in Senate File 7 would be retroactive and would make the already approved reimbursement grant and aid process for which we are already in the works ineligible when at the time of approval they were in fact, as Director Kelly indicated, eligible uses within the program. As Director Wagi pointed out, really the key to understanding this from a practitioner's standpoint is the tight integration between FEMA procedures under the Stafford Act and our local procedures under 12A and 12B. Following a disaster, the local government, in our case, with the city, in collaboration with Hennepin County, we conduct an initial damage assessment where we identify and document damage based on FEMA criteria. So the entire lens through which we see this damage assessment from the very time we walk out into the field the first time is through that FEMA lens. We provide that documentation to HSEM, who verifies the damage information, and if indicated, requests a joint preliminary damage assessment from FEMA, which Director Kelly has talked about it. That then is a partnership between the state, FEMA, the county, and the city to go through and again, verify the damage and make sure that it fits within the criteria established under the Stafford Act. That validated damage information then informs the request and recommendation for a presidential declaration disaster that we submit through Hennepin County to HSEM for analysis and recommendation to the governor. And as discussed, the governor then decides whether to forward the request to FEMA, who may then submit it to the president for his decision. So from the beginning, our damage assessment is guided by the FEMA programs for which we may be eligible and the specific eligibility requirements of each program. In this case, we're focusing on that public assistance program, which according to FEMA, quote, provides funding for emergency assistance to save lives and protect property and assists with funding for permanently restoring community infrastructure affected by a federally declared incident, close quote. So there's a number of procedural hurdles that must be cleared in order to make the case for such assistance. For public assistance, there has to be an eligible applicant, such as a local government, and the work itself has to be eligible. In order for the work to be eligible, it must be caused by the incident, located within the designated area, be the legal responsibility of the applicant, and must be undertaken at a reasonable cost. Moreover, the eligible work, and therefore the damage assessments, must fall into 7 established categories. We've talked about this a little bit with respect to the schedules that Director Kelly referred to. But with respect to emergency work, we assess debris removal and emergency protective measures. And with respect to permanent work, we assess roads and bridges, water control facilities, public buildings and contents, public utilities, parks, and recreational and other facilities. And obviously only some of those categories are implicated by this fire-driven incident. So the purpose of this exercise is to make sure that we filter only allowable costs from all the potential damages that were caused in the incident. And of all the impacts that are causally related to the incident, only a small slice of those impacts that meet FEMA criteria and for which we can show adequate documentation make it through to the stage where reimbursement may be considered. As a result of the fires that took place over the summer, we were able to document and verify emergency work of nearly $950,000 in debris removal and $101,000 in emergency protective measures. With respect to permanent work, we documented approximately $13.1 million in public buildings and equipment. And for that, we are appreciative of the support that we have received and will receive through this reimbursement process. Right now, just to bring you up to date on what we are doing, we are currently developing what are called project worksheets in conjunction with HSEM for the debris removal, emergency protective measures, and some of the equipment lost to fire. We have to be in the position where we can point to specific reasonable expenditures that meet all other criteria in order to submit that then for a reimbursement. Eligible costs include labor, equipment, materials, contract work, as well as other direct and indirect administrative costs. Again, we are still being driven by the FEMA guidance here and the tight integration with the regulations and the systems that FEMA has established. That is the criteria by which HSEM reviews the paperwork that we submit and the basis upon which any compliance or grant or not grant of the request is made. So assuming we are able to meet the burden of documentation, the state would then provide the direct reimbursement to the city. So that, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, sort of brings us up again from the practitioners level. My team was the team that went out initially and actually did those initial damage assessments, and bringing it down now into the process where we're working to get that reimbursement on behalf of the city itself. So again, we are grateful to the state for approving our disaster assistance application. And as you've heard, we're working as best we can at this point in time to refill all the requirements to make those reimbursement requests. And we will continue to proceed along those lines. Mr. Chair, that's all I have, and I would certainly stand for any questions at the end of the testimony.
Thank you, Director Lane. We'll move on to President Dewey Johnson from the Minnesota Emergency Managers Association.
Yes, Mr.
President
Chair.
Johnson, welcome to the committee. Before you begin, would you identify yourself for the record?
Yes, sir. Dewey Johnson. I'm the St. Louis County Emergency Manager, and today representing Minnesota Association of Minnesota Emergency Managers.
All right, please proceed.
All right, thank you. And I'll make this short. I echo some of the comments my colleagues made. Statewide, we appreciate the assistance, and that disaster assistance account has been grateful and brings many benefits to it. As emergency managers, we plan for all kinds of hazards, natural, technological, man-made, civil unrest, terroristic attacks. Some of these are difficult to put into categories. In regards to the civil unrest response in 2020, while the damage was in the metro area, the response really was a statewide effort, with the emergency managers coming down to help with coordination and command roles, law enforcement, EMS, and fire. We also had our local issues that we dealt with up here in St. Louis County in the city of Duluth. We had from assaults to burning vehicles. So it's not just a metro issue, it's a statewide issue. I've been contacted by many members that are concerned about the change. Just as we're northern Minnesota, we're dealing with civil unrest every day now with the Line 3 project. It's been smaller issues, but smaller communities are really concerned what could possibly happen during some of these civil unrest, and to know that there's no assistance or help could be very, very devastating to some of these communities. So again, it's really a statewide response. Even up here locally, when we planned for Line 3 issues, we've had help from the State Patrol, from the DNR, Director Kelly's division, Emergency Office of Communications. It's really a statewide response, and we really work together and value each of those relationships. So I just want to bring that perspective from AMEM. Again, I represent the 87 counties, 11 tribes and cities throughout the state with emergency management, and changing the language in 12B could have some unwanted consequences down the road. And we know if we'd like to discuss, or as we work through the process, we're more than happy to help. And we have some experts, as you listen to Director Waggy and Director Lane. We have some very educated people who are more than willing to help work through these changes if needed. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you, President Johnson. I understand that Justin Freed is on our list. Last but not least, Mr. Freed, would you identify yourself for the record? I should say Director Freed from Ramsey County Emergency Management.
Thank you, sir. I apologize wholeheartedly for being late here. I must have missed an email someplace and
no problem.
Didn't get the link in time.
No problem.
That's it. For the record, my name is Judson Freed. I am the Director of Emergency Management in Ramsey County. I'm a past president of the Association of Minnesota Emergency Managers as well, and pretty much wrote the language for what is now Chapter 12B back in the day. Worked very hard with the legislature to come up with this bill, or with the law that's now in place. Worked closely with Homeland Security, Emergency Management, Department of Public Safety, House, the legislature as a whole, and my colleagues across Minnesota. In that light, I too have very significant concerns with making changes to 12B. for these kind of specific purposes. We scoped the rules very specifically to align closely to what FEMA was doing, to have a way of being transparent with the people of Minnesota as to what we were asking for and why certain amounts were allowed and certain amounts were not, and how we would get to the 50% reimbursement allotment. The changes that are being discussed, and I believe that our president was just speaking, but I called in late, as I said, they don't just affect us in the Twin Cities metro area. Civil unrest is something that happens across our state, unfortunately, in different ways at different times. The problems become that to a large extent, under the federal rules, these are not going to raise to the level of a presidential declaration. When these incidents happen, coping with them, whether we cope with them in a way that people like or don't like, just the act of coping is expensive, is not budgetable up front. And it places communities in the position of having no recourse at the end on how we're going to cope. We come then to the legislature at a later date and ask you to make sudden changes to what you had planned, or late changes to what you had planned. And we were doing this as the result of tornadoes and blizzards in the past. Quite honestly, when we wrote this rule, we weren't looking at civil unrest as a primary thing, and it's still not the primary thing. But I urge really extreme caution in making changes. This has been a law that's been very effective. It's enabled us to come to you in advance and let you, as the legislature and the people of Minnesota, know what kind of ask may be coming their way to help us in the event of disaster and catastrophe. Making these kind of changes takes away that transparency. It takes away the knowledge that if we can't cope, and remember, we do put the skin in the game up front. We do the training, the equipping, the hiring, the firing, the maintenance of all the people who are going to be responding to these situations. And it doesn't cover every single aspect of every single action. But when we get catastrophic disasters, as we've had over the last couple of years, and in particular this past summer, it's our last gasp effort to try and help salvage something for our communities. So I ask you to exercise extreme caution to slow the pace of any change that you might make, and most certainly, please involve the emergency managers, both through the association and in the larger areas that are often affected by this, but also in areas like where the pipeline has been located and like the people who've experienced this. Involve us in whatever action you take, I beg, so that whatever we come up with, if there is to be a change, that change will reflect the needs, not just of the Twin Cities, but of all the counties in Minnesota. And that's kind of my ask for you today. I didn't prepare a handout or anything like that. The information on how this bill was formed is all in your record. The law, as it functions now, has functioned well for several years, and I would like you to consider the dangers of making changes.
Caught myself again being on mute. Thank you, Director Freed. We'll now move into question and answer. I believe Senator Kiffmeyer has the first on deck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, my question is more for Mr. Backus or Mr. Turner, and it has to do, since the Stafford Act was mentioned quite a bit, and so if they could let me know, because the DACA, this type of disaster account, is fairly recent. I remember serving in my time of having these being taken care of. It's not a matter of will they get paid or not for these kinds of things. But I think it's important to know, and I want to understand, before we had the DACA account, what was the statutory methodology that we used for this kinds for disasters of this sort?
Who would like to answer that
I'll-
question?
I'll take a stab at it.
Mr. Turner, our fiscal analyst.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Kiffmeyer. That's a good question. This law was passed in 2000, or 12B was passed in 2014. That was what, 26 years after the Stafford Act was passed in 1988. So the state has responded to disasters long before we put in place 12B. 12B is a state law based on state-defined needs for disasters that didn't rise to a federal declaration. And I guess the discussion with this bill is on civil unrest. And those declarations are unique. As a matter of fact, I think this is the first one. And I think the point of Senator Rosen's bill is that those situations can be dealt with outside of the framework of Chapter 12B.
Senator Kiffmeyer, did you have another question?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. So my understanding then is that that is the situation. So I just think it's really important to be clear here that these kind of legitimate expenses, I remember in my years in the legislature, whether it was flooding up in the Red River Valley or a variety of other places, we in the legislature did respond and did do a great deal of work. And a matter of fact, it was very helpful because when you have the process of discussing this and what the needs are and what's going on, let me tell you, not living in an area like the Red River Valley where these kinds of flooding goes on, I think it's very helpful to have the rest of the legislature understand what this does to the local communities. Otherwise, through the DACA account, we're often kind of hidden from those kinds of impacts. But I think it's very important to do that. So the question I had, and maybe Mr. Turner could, I don't think it's appropriate in the committee hearing today, Mr. Turner, but if you could give a little bit more of the history of the issues that were resolved prior to DACA that were under that purview of this similar kind of a thing, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. We'll move on to Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the testifiers for their testimony today. It was quite, I got a couple of questions, Mr. Chair, if you would so allow me. The last testifier, Director Freed, said in his own words that it wasn't set up. The work that he had done representing the 87 counties was not set up or considered for considering for riots or civil unrest. And I think that's a real accurate statement. I was emergency management director myself when I was sheriff, and I don't remember any discussions at all going on about that. So I then go to Deputy Johnson, Director Johnson, who oversees the 87 counties. Has this been a big discussion at your AMC meetings? Of the 87 counties, was it overwhelming support? And then I'll ask another question, Mr. Chair.
President Johnson, do you understand the question? I'm not sure if President Johnson is with us any longer.
Okay. Well, the only reason I ask that question is the further you get from the metro area, the more we're hearing as legislators out here that constituents don't think that rural counties should be paying for what happened during the civil unrest, and that's the question that came up. My other question and comments. Somebody mentioned explosions. I'm not sure exactly who that was. The bomber the bombers that have gone on, the bombs that, and you know what, I can understand that because they're pretty highly unpreventable. So there's a defining difference, at least in my thinking, that civil unrest that consistently goes on for days is way different than somebody who sets a bomb in an area where probably obviously nobody knows about it. It's highly unpreventable. I don't think the civil unrest was unpreventable. So I'm questioning whether we should be looking at any kind of a correlation between explosions, bombs like that, versus what we're talking about today. And then my final question Director Kelly, you and I have talked before about this, and I'm wondering, the presidential declaration refusal for Minnesota, do you know of what possibly Wisconsin's reaction was with Kenosha, Washington State with the Seattle riots, Oregon with the Portland riots? I believe they're going on now again. Were they turned down by the presidential disaster? Do you know, or do you not know that?
Director Kelly.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, Senator Engebretson, I don't know, but I will find out. I would tell you that there are other cases in the recent past from the Standing Rock demonstrations in North Dakota, civil unrest following officer-involved shooting in Baltimore a few years ago. Ferguson, Missouri is very infamous, if you will. In all those cases in the past, those governors have asked FEMA for federal disaster assistance and were denied. I don't know about the recent ones in Oregon, Seattle, and Kenosha, but I will make query and report back to the committee if that's what you would like.
Senator Engebretson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. You could send that to the members of the committee or to me, and I'll see to it that they get it. Director, thank you for that answer. I think it's quite clear that these are just the things that are happening and going on that are not natural disasters, and that's where my big riff is that when somebody has a tornado or a hailstorm, or you know what I'm talking about, a natural disaster that nobody gets up in the morning and can prevent, similar to an explosion, would not qualify for this. So my ask now would be, and I'll finish, Mr. Chair, if I could, the representatives from Hennepin or Minneapolis, have you tried any other avenues of revenue, such as taxation or any bonding proposals where the actual local taxpayer pays for the bonding proposal and over a 7 or 8 or 10 year period for the infrastructure, as they do now for other infrastructure things? Then I'll stop.
Who would like to answer that question? Is it perhaps Director Freed or Director Lane?
From the Ramsey County perspective,
Director Freed.
we did not. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Senator Engebretson. Ramsey County didn't request these funds at this point. We were not eligible. The damages that we incurred were not of the type that made us eligible for a presidential declaration. To be very clear, though, the concept of 12B was for all hazards. Very specifically for all hazards, as is 12A, as is the Stafford Act. The idea being that there are hazards that happen that we cannot predict will happen in the way that they happen. I know for a fact there will be severe storms this summer. I cannot predict if they will be severe enough to cause damage. If they do cause damage, I can't predict if they will be great enough to cause damage that would make us eligible for either state aid or first a presidential declaration of disaster. The vast majority of major incidents that occur in any county, and I work on this nationally. I'm a member of the National Academies of Science. I'm president of the International Association of Emergency Managers, and I am the vice chair of the National Association of Counties committee that works on this as well. These disasters, the vast majority, are never asked anyone outside of the jurisdiction to assist. They are absorbed within the jurisdiction. They cause those problems. on occasion, things get so bad that we have no recourse to handle ourselves and reach out to our fellow Americans or fellow Minnesotans for assistance. There is always the question, when is it the job of the people of one county to help out another? I can't answer when that is. I can tell you that there are occasions when we don't have an option other than to ask. And that's what this law was set up. It wasn't set up, and if I said it wasn't set up thinking about a civil unrest, this is true. It wasn't set up about thinking about tornado or anything else. It was set up for all hazard, whatever the hazard is that is outside of our venue. But within our county, at the moment, we are absorbing the damages that were done to public infrastructure within ourselves. And the vast majority of the damage in my county was not to public infrastructure, so was not eligible under this at all. I can't speak for Hennepin or for Minneapolis, however.
Thank you.
Would anyone, thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Senator Ingebrigtsen. Would anyone from,
Mr. Chair, I'd like to comment on that if you don't mind.
Senator Rosen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just like to read, and speaking with Representative Pulowski, who was the House author, he believes, quote, that the intent was for naturally occurring disasters. And I want to make sure that 12B was for naturally occurring disasters. And also, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make sure that Director Kelly had a chance to express his concerns. I have not heard his concerns yet, and I just wanted to make sure that I'm able to address those. Thank you.
All right. Well, why don't I go to either Director Lane or Director Wagi with Senator Ingebrigtsen's question. Were any of your jurisdictions starting to initiate any type of revenue enhancement for the damages in light of the request denied by the president?
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Director Lane, please proceed.
There's a little latency here, so it's easy to step on your, I apologize for that.
All right.
At this point in time, this is a reimbursement program. So the city is having to pay upfront in order to be eligible even for the program as it exists. So, we are, in fact, as we go through here, paying, to the best of my knowledge, our own way as we go forward. And then as things are reimbursable under this program, which we are proceeding under, then that reimbursement would come back. So to that extent, to the basket of damages we're talking about here related to these fires, to the best of my knowledge, at this time, we're not proceeding with any other alternative, but I would point out that we are in fact paying for it up front. So if in fact these things turn out not to be reimbursable or our documentation is not sufficient, that risk is ultimately on us.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. And if I could just do one follow-up on that, Senator.
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
One follow-up and then I'm done. Can you tell me, Director Lane, how much was cut out of the police budget this year? I know the city council and the mayor were talking about some defunding of portions of their budget. Can you tell me how much money that is and real quickly where that's going?
Director Lane.
Mr. Chair, Senator, I am not part of or affiliate, we're separate from the police department, so I don't have that exact number to hand. We'll be happy to get that for you and provide it to the committee.
Thank you. I look forward to that. And thank you so much.
You bet.
Director Wagi, did you want to weigh in on Senator Ingebrigtsen's question?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebrigtsen, committee members. Hennepin County had taken steps to mitigate these types of events prior to by having insurance policies on its facilities and buildings. And so the figure that we're seeking is really the deductible that wasn't covered, which is typically part of a Stafford Act request as well. So our loss was significantly higher than the amount we're seeking from the state relief. And among the factors that we calculate, all of these jurisdictions calculate when they're doing this, is other expenses, other disasters that have occurred. Those are typical things in the Stafford formula. And of course, we're busy funding all kinds of disasters, not just this one. So any types of relief that are available, including this program, are the ones that we're going to be seeking.
So thank you for that,
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Mr. Chair. And so the insurance that you're seeking, that's not for public infrastructure, that's for private infrastructure, private buildings. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair.
Director Whitey?
Yep, Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebrigtsen, and committee members, no, this is distinct from that. This is insurance on our public buildings, our Hennepin County owned buildings that we have. And so the 1 million and change figure represents the deductible from those Hennepin County owned facilities that were damaged or destroyed. Other things that we've been attempting to help the community alongside Minneapolis and other impacted communities are the small business administration loans for those folks, the community foundations and relief organizations that are trying to do that. It's a whole package to try to help all these different aspects as well. But the figure that we're seeking under the rules allowed by 12B and the Stafford Act regulations are those public, meaning the government-owned facilities only.
Thank you. Thanks for so much time.
Let's move on to Senator Latz. He's been very patient.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have, I guess, a number of questions here, if I may. Senator Rosen, could you help me understand the motivation behind this bill?
Senator Rosen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly Senator Latz. The motivation is that I believe the 12B is being used for something that it was not originally planned for. And it clearly states that in 12A, natural disasters in Minnesota. And it's being interpreted for 12B that fire and flood and explosion of any kind can be available for the DACA public assistance. I don't think that's right. And I want to make sure that we are not paying, the taxpayers in Minnesota are not paying for something that perhaps by the actions of our executive branch and the mayor of Minneapolis, perhaps we're exasperated. And I've heard over and over again from Greater Minnesota, from my constituents, that please do not pay for this out of our taxpayer dollars. I think there's other ways of dealing with this. The governor took the legislature's ability to review this and have a proper procedure away from us by just automatically taking it from the DACA account, which leaves less now for any natural disaster that's going to come forward.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Latz.
Correct me if I'm wrong, someone who's listening, but my understanding is the legislature doesn't get involved in the DACA allocate appropriation decisions, no matter what the application is, right? So it's kind of hard to say that the governor took that prerogative away from the legislature. It seems to me the legislature delegated that prerogative to the executive branch when it passed 12B. It also seems to me that if Representative Pulowski's original intent or the Senate's original intent or anyone's original intent had been to limit 12B to natural disasters, then they could have written that into the statute. But in fact, they did not. They wrote in there of any cause, quite clearly, intentionally, explicitly, did not limit it to natural disasters. But there's a lot to unpack in Senator Rosen's comments. I mean, your constituents and Senator Ingebrigtsen said the same thing. They don't want to pay for that mess in Minneapolis. Well, let me ask you this. If the city of Moorhead builds infrastructure, roads, sewers, buildings in a well-known floodplain, and the Red River floods like it always does, and it destroys homes and it destroys roads and it destroys bridges and it destroys buildings or damages them, why should the people in the metro area help pay to rebuild those things when it was some foolish political decision by the leaders of Moorhead or Clay County to build in the first place, or in many cases, rebuild after floods in exactly the same disaster-prone areas. Why shouldn't the same principle apply to that as you would now apply to what happened in Minneapolis?
I can answer that.
Senator Ingebretson?
I wouldn't support that, Senator Latz, no more than you would. If it was actually built in a flood zone, it should be the responsible of the local unit of government or that particular person that did it. No different than the people that were responsible for allowing the actions that went on in Minneapolis. People in Moorhead had nothing to do with Minneapolis. But if they came through with a storm, they would pay for it. They would help pay for it, just like we always have.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Latz?
the information I have is that there was at least one person from the city of Moorhead that was arrested in connection with the civil unrest in Minneapolis. The information I have is that there were, let's see here, 3 people from Big Lake that I believe is represented by Senator Kiffmeyer, if I'm contemplating my political boundaries correctly. We got one person from East Bethel. We've got people from Farmington. We've got people from, let's see here. Let's pick some other greater Minnesota places, since you seem to be mostly concerned about that. 2 from Rochester, 1 from St. Michael. We got Woodbury, Wilmer, White Bear Lake, West St. Paul, Wayzata, Wabasha, Victoria, St. Michael. In fact, if you look at the numbers here, there are more people, a majority of the people that caused the damage in Minneapolis, or at least who were arrested for causing the damage in Minneapolis, were from outside, had residential addresses from outside the city of Minneapolis. So if we want to visit the blame on the people who caused the damage rather than on the victims of the damage, then we should be visiting this blame statewide. Absolutely. Should be visiting this statewide. Now, there was an article in the paper yesterday, Minneapolis Star Tribune, just for the 3rd precinct burn down of the fire department there. 2 people from St. Paul were just charged with federal charges. There's already been, here, I've got the article for people who want to see it right here. I'm not making this stuff up. Here's a guy from Staples, Minnesota. Here's a guy from Brainerd, Minnesota. And let's see, what were they charged with? Conspiracy to commit arson for their roles in the fire. One of them helped light a Molotov cocktail. The other one carried the Molotov cocktail inside the building to help exacerbate the fire. And by the way, there are people from around the country too. Here's a guy from Texas who was a member of the far-right anti-government Boogaloo Boys, been charged with firing at the precinct with an AK-47 type rifle while people were inside. And by the way, I also recall in the news, there was some talk about some other Boogaloo Boys that had planned to bomb a courthouse in greater Minnesota. I think northern Minnesota was the article. And then after this, they decided they'd aim for a courthouse in the metro area. So I think it's awfully hard for the folks from greater Minnesota to say it was all Minneapolis's fault. It was all Minneapolis political leadership fault, or the governor's political leadership errors. When you've got this, I mean, let's say a Minneapolis resident who was a member of the Boogaloo Boys decided to go down to Fairmont and bomb the courthouse there. And let's say it was foreseeable. Let's say he'd been posting all over Facebook that that's what he was going to do. And that generated other copycat bombings. And for some reason, the people in Fairmont, the leadership in Fairmont, just weren't able to prevent it from happening. Who ends up suffering? Who ends up suffering? You know, the GOP has been really, really vocal about protecting or trying to protect small businesses over the last.
Senator Latz, could we focus our discussion on the bill itself? We're
Sure.
taking a rather circuitous route to make a point, and I appreciate your logic skills and your courtroom talents, but I really would like to stay focused on the bill if we could.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think they are all quite focused on the bill, as Senator Rosen indicated the purpose of why she was bringing the bill in the first place. But let me ask you this to, I guess, Senator Rosen, how would you define civil unrest?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to respond to Senator Latt's first comments about the intent of the bill. I mean, pretty much everything was thought about: landslide, mudslide, volcanic earth eruption. Never in their wildest dreams in 2014 would they have thought that civil unrest should have been in this legislation. And that is coming from the House author. So I'm just clarifying that it does not have a place in the DACA account for this type of appropriation. If there was a bomb in Fairmont and something happened in Fairmont, I would put a separate bill in to make sure that the legislature had the opportunity to debate this, and we were fully engaged. Here, the governor has taken away our ability to be fully engaged by a point blank, this belongs in the DACA account. What I determined civil unrest, I don't think that really has any validity to this discussion, Mr. Chair. And I don't have your courtroom skills, Senator Latz, but civil unrest is when you cause, I guess, I mean, apparently I haven't looked it up in the dictionary, and I probably should have. But apparently if you cause damage to any property, whether it's public or private, and bodily harm, that it would be civil unrest to me. A protest is perfectly legit. Everybody has the right to march and get their opinion out. But when you make bodily or physical damage, that's civil unrest.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Latz.
I think this bill needs a little more clarity than that, because if one person hurts someone else, that's criminal assault. If they damage property, it's criminal damage to property, depending on the value of the property, well into the felony is easily obtainable. But if you've got one person that lights a fire in a public building, is that civil unrest? If you got 10 people, is it civil unrest? At what threshold does it become civil unrest as opposed to anything else? I also have a concern, as to who's considered to be the victims here. All of these businesses along Lake Street relied on the public infrastructure in order to do their private business work, right? The streets, the gas lines, the water mains, the sewage, the lights. They're the ones that end up being hurt if Minneapolis doesn't have the resources to promptly rebuild. And they're the ones that are paying the property taxes that might have to get raised, if under Senator Ingebrigtsen's theory here, in order to pay for that. Yeah, they were nothing but victims. So it doesn't seem to me to be fair to lay all the burden, or a good portion of the burden, back on to them. I think this just isn't necessary. And you can't blame the governor for this stuff. This is what the legislature said. And if we want to go back to a circumstance where every time there's a disaster that doesn't fit within this extremely broad drafting of the bill, we want to come into with special bills again, then I suppose we can maybe hope that there are enough Minneapolis and St. Paul and metro area legislators that are willing to help pay for the Fairmont courthouse if it gets blown up by one person causing civil unrest. Because if there aren't, then the taxpayers in that county are going to have to pay for that cost. I'm going to take Senator Ingebrigtsen at his word. Next time there's flooding in the Red River Valley, in infrastructure that was built on the flat tableland all around the Red River, I'm going to assume he's going to come forward and oppose any disaster relief for any of the infrastructure that gets destroyed during that flooding. I hope it never happens. I hope it never happens because no one should have to go through this. But this feels an awful lot like blaming the victim here. You know, if we're going to try to act as a state as a whole, then we should act as a state as a whole. You know what? We know as a matter of documentation that the metro area, and in particular Hennepin County, is a net payer for all sorts of things that benefit greater Minnesota. There's more money going out of Hennepin County through the state redistribution to pay for LGA and to pay for county aid and to pay for transportation, roads and bridges. A lot more money comes out of the taxpayers of Hennepin County to the rest of Minnesota than comes back into Hennepin County. In fact, even if you just look at the disaster relief numbers, I think Kitson County has like a $46 per capita disaster relief figure. And Hennepin County for many, many years was flat zero. Now I think they're at like $10 or something like that. So even straight out of the disaster fund, greater Minnesota benefits far more from the money that the metro area is putting in through our taxpayers. So for greater Minnesota now to say, metro area, in your time of need, we're not going to be there, all that is divisive and unfortunate. And I just don't think, for a lot of reasons, that this bill ought to move forward.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Mr. Chair, if I could just ask that perhaps the Judiciary Committee,
Senator Rosen.
thank you, would like to have a definition, come up with a definition of civil unrest. Perhaps that would help with this issue and discussion.
Well, we do have a researcher, Mr. Backus. Do you have any light to shed on the definition of civil unrest?
Mr. Chair and members, I certainly don't have anything off the top of my head. I'm not aware that it's a defined term in Minnesota statutes. I mean, I could try to come up with something, but you know, it's somewhat subject to interpretation. It might mean different things to different people. I could try to work on it, like I said, but nothing really springs to mind right this second.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Backus. I know the governor made mention of the word civil unrest quite often during those days. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's rather interesting, Mr. Chair, that if we're going to interpret in this particular case and add by governor's use of the word civil unrest, he by himself has inserted that into his interpretation of this DACA law. Where can this go next? What next interpretation? What next under Senator Latz's own said, oh, this is so broad? I don't know. I think a tornado is pretty specific. I don't think that it is so broad that that kind of interpretation could go here. And the other thing is that the legislature created this in 2014. These legislation like this are always subject to a future legislature to make a change when they take a look and say, how did this work? How did it go? It's the right of the legislature to do that. But my concern is when this fund is emptied for things that are brand new interpretations and calling it available for that, what about the tornado? What about some of those other things that may come about for us? And personally, I think it's irrelevant in regards to the who. Sometimes that takes us into a quite a discussion. I think the issue here on this particular bill is how is it funded? How is it funded and what is this definition? But it is the governor who initiated his interpretation at calling it that. And I think the governor then has the responsibility to talk about that or what he wants to do, because he's the one that done it. Otherwise, it's been a long time standing of the legislature. But I do have a question for Mr. Waggy, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Director Waggy, are you with us?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Did you understand the question of Senator Kiffmeyer?
I didn't ask it yet, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry.
Oh, Senator Kiffmeyer.
I just wanted to ask permission to ask for Mr. Waggy because I know sometimes they're, I just wanted to be sure he had a heads up that a question was coming his way. I do know that in my district, there were local law enforcement and others who responded to give assistance and so on, and that there's a special mutual aid, I think it is called. So on that mutual aid, though, there is a requirement also, or as part of the mutual aid, that these entities get reimbursed for the expenses, the time, and other things like that. Can you tell me, Mr. Wagi, have you reimbursed local law enforcement, emergency management, whatever that mutual aid is, have you reimbursed them for their expenses to date?
Director Wagi.
Mr. Chair, Senator Kiffmeyer, committee members, that would be have been a request at the request of Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis, and I'm assuming it went through Chapter 12. I would like to give that question to Director Lane, please.
Director Lane.
So, Mr. Chair, Senator Kiffmeyer, the focus of today is obviously on the fires and the aid related to that. I don't have in front of me the mutual aid agreement or whether it was whether it was paid. And you're talking about specifically related to the period that we're talking about here, the civil unrest period, if you will. We can certainly find that out. That's, again, a PD budget item, and it's just not something that comes across my desk very often.
Mr. Chair?
Director Kiffmeyer.
I'll clarify then. So yes, over the period that's in question for right now, I know there was a significant call out for mutual aid. And so over that period of time of the civil unrest, whatever that definition is, riots, protests, those kinds of time frame, yes, for those mutual aids agreements that were used, have they been paid? And we're talking about a significant amount of time has lapsed since then, so I'm expecting they would be paid. And so if you can get us that information for the committee or however you would like to do it, Mr. Lane, but if you could get that. And as this bill is moving forward, I hope that doesn't take too long. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Senator, we'll take care of it.
Thank you. Senator Johnson, you had your hand up earlier. Do you still have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Senator Rosen took care of the question that I had, so thank you for that.
All right. Senator Bigham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel like Senator Latz and I are almost swapping personalities today, so I'm trying to process that because I feel eerily calm today over this issue. And I do want to point out, I don't know if the committee is well aware, but Director Judd Freed is an award-winning international award-winning talent we have here in Minnesota, and Ramsey County is blessed to have him in Minnesota and I think that we should listen to a lot of what he has to say. So I don't know if Senator Rosen knows this, but Dakota County, where I represent, had damage from the civil unrest as well. And I don't think they consider West St. Paul and Apple Valley greater Minnesota. And so, I think that we should be more focused on what causes the civil unrest rather than and seeing how we can prohibit it maybe or work through it maybe more than kind of coming at it like this. But, I saw people in my community come together to give resource and relief to whether it was Minneapolis, St. Paul, or the suburbs that needed help. I saw drives, food drives, diaper drives, cleanup drives to help. I saw a community come together and help. And whether that was Minneapolis or Fairmont, I think it would have happened because we're Minnesotans. I wouldn't let when a burn down precinct in Minneapolis happens, I want that rebuilt so those officers can have a place to work. And whether that was the 3rd precinct or whether that was in Fairmont or Kitson or Douglas, I would have been there. I would have come down to Senator Rosen's district and done whatever I could to help, because that's what Minnesotans do. I think we look at our county and city partners to help with this, and they look at the state and the feds to help us with civil unrest and with emergency preparedness and or emergency preparedness, whether it's civil unrest or a tornado or whatnot. And I think it's more that we need to consider that this tool that you would be taking away or further defining ultimately allows it to fall on the property tax dollars and the payers. I think we definitely are not where we need to be in this discussion on a proposal like this. But I just think that, does it merit having some sort of discussion? I'm sure it does, because I mean, I'm not in charge. I'd probably be more or less looking at a plan to get the virus under control. But I think when we're looking at a process like this, letting this fall on property taxes and our local governments is a difficulty. And without a plan to address that directly, other than introducing a bill, which we know can take a long time, I don't know that I would want my community, Senator Rosen's community, Senator Latz's community, Senator Johnson's community to have to wait to have a community clinic, libraries, police precincts rebuilt. You know, where the civil unrest happened, they love their communities and their libraries and schools, just like outstate Minnesota citizens do. And then they saw their cities get burnt down, and that's traumatic, and it would be for any community. So I just think this really isn't that Minnesotan, this bill. And so I think we should more come together, and that's what we do. And let's maybe take a look at the root of what maybe is causing the civil unrest first. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Bingham. Senator Latz, final word.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I don't think this bill is ready to move forward without a careful definition of civil unrest. Even though I oppose the bill on the merits, I don't see how this bill's just not drafted completely yet. Second of all, I mean, we could visit, I suppose, if we really wanted to spread out where the cause of these damages, put the costs where the causes came from. We should just take the total dollar amount that is required to rebuild the portions of Minneapolis and just spread that out proportionally into the property tax bases of the communities where those who came to Minneapolis to cause the damage live. And that way, Greater Minnesota can bear its share of the responsibility for the damage that Greater Minnesota caused, and Minneapolis can bear its share of the damages for that. But one thing that hasn't gotten a lot of conversation here, Mr. Chair, is the retroactivity here. So not only would it be changing the policy going forward, but this would effectively try to claw back $12 million from the city of Minneapolis that's already in the process of being spent and distributed on its own infrastructure rebuilding. And that seems to me particularly unfair. If it's the will of the legislature to change the rules going forward, you know, that's the process, that's the will of the legislature. But to change the rules going backwards is it's unbecoming, I think, of the legislature, and it's not fair to anyone participating in the process. So I'm particularly frustrated by the retroactive feature of this bill. And I'm sure that if the shoe were on the other foot, other recipients of disaster aid would not want us to retroactively try to claw back money that was spent, for example, to rebuild infrastructure in flood-prone areas where infrastructure was built again in flood-prone areas. So I think particularly that provision ought to be removed from this bill. It's just not fair.
Thank you, Senator Latz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have been told that Mr. Backus does have some language for us to consider regarding definition of civil unrest. Mr. Backus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Since I last spoke, I was paging through the statutes and I was reminded that we do have a definition of civil disorder. It's in section 609.669, which is in the criminal code. And I'll read you the existing definition that we could essentially cross-reference if you'd like. Civil disorder means any public disturbance involving acts of violence by assemblages of 3 or more persons, which causes an immediate danger of or results in damage or injury to the property or person of any other individual. So that's something, again, I have an oral amendment if you'd like to use that to cross-reference that definition.
Sarah Rosen, what do you think of that language?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that would be appropriate, and perhaps that would satisfy Senator Latz's concern for no definition of civil unrest, which is very valid. But the governor did use civil unrest. We've all used that term many, many times since the May incident, and perhaps we need to clarify that in this legislation.
Any other discussion about that potential oral amendment? Hearing none, do I have a motion? Senator Ingebrigtsen, would you move the oral amendment?
Mr. Chair, can I actually read what the oral amendment would be, just so you have it in front of you?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that. I read the definition, but the actual amendment would be on page 1, line 10, delete unrest and insert disorder, comma, as defined in section 609.669, subdivision 2.
All right. Senator Ingebrigtsen, would you move the oral amendment?
Well, Mr. Chair, to the amendment, this would be added to I don't have the bill in front of me. I apologize here. What would this, maybe legal can tell me this. What will this do to the senator's bill moving forward? Just the definition of civil unrest is added to it.
Mr. Backus?
Mr. Chair and Senator Ingebrigtsen, yes, it would substitute. There's currently an undefined term, civil protest, civil unrest. It would replace that with a civil disorder with a specific definition cross-referenced.
If the author's okay, I will offer the amendment.
Right. Senator Ingebrigtsen moves the oral amendment as described by Mr. Backus.
Chairman, to the amendment?
Yes. Any further discussion, Senator Latz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So does this mean that the 2 people who blew up the Alfred Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, that would not have qualified to be excluded from the disaster fund? So if the federal building in Minneapolis gets blown up by 1 person or 2 people, then they would qualify? And
Mr. Backus?
Mr. Chair and Senator Latz, yes, I think you've seized on part of that definition where it refers to assemblages of 3 or more persons. If you would like, we could add a definition without cross-referencing and leave that portion out if the committee prefers that.
So, Mr. Chairman, any public disturbance involving acts of violence? I mean, clearly those are criminal acts now, but would that be the intent, that any public disturbance involving an act of violence that causes damage should not qualify for any disaster relief, even if it's a massive amount of damage that to a building that serves the entire state? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure 30 seconds worth of conversation on this is gonna.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I do think Senator Latz is on to, the 3 or more. However, this account was created for natural disasters. It only has a limited amount of money in it. You have a blow up of a courthouse, or you have some huge event like that, I would assume there'd be a special session, an appropriate piece of legislation introduced. This is so the the legislature, the DACA account was created so the legislature did not have to come in and become complicated every single time there was a special session, and that we didn't over appropriate and have to in the end put money back into the account. We didn't have a pile-on of a whole bunch of other issues onto that one issue that we were called in for. So I want to make sure that we understand this is just about 12B also. This is not about 12A in the federal declaration. So I think there's been some, in the testimony too, there's been some conflating of that issue also.
Senator Bingham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to belabor it, but I think I'm going to just point out that this is kind of the reason why I think there is a decision by folks to whether it qualifies for disaster assistance funds or not on an individual kind of basis. That's why we're out of it, and as the legislature, that's why the legislature's authority was delegated to do this. And then it, obviously, as Chair Rosen properly stated, that there's 12A, 12B, and this is only on 12B. But so I'm just kind of pointing that out, that 2 people can do a lot of damage and cause civil unrest if they do something, and then that causes civil unrest. So the original act doesn't qualify, or would maybe qualify, but the subsequent acts of civil unrest wouldn't. Like, I think it's almost, I don't know, it's almost getting a little bit too cute about how, or too not focused, too pigeonholed. You know what I mean? Like, just it's just not getting where I think the author is wanting to go. But I still think that it would have a lot more work to do.
Thank you, Senator Bingham. We have the amendment before us.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Latz.
what is your intent with regard to the bill?
I believe if passed, it would go to the floor.
And do we know if the bill is going to make progress in the House, in the other body? I know that's one of the criteria that you have often used in determining whether to even hear bills in our body, let alone pass them out of committee.
Senator Rosen, I will dare to talk about the other body, but could you give us any kind of progress report in the House?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and very good question. The Representative Pulowski is the author of the House version of Senate File 7. He introduced it today, I believe, and that's all I can tell you. He's intent on getting the same message out that I have relayed to this committee, and whether it makes progress and there's an end deal, I have no idea. I would assume, Senator Latz, this will be part of the end deal. I would assume there's going to, but I know there's funds that are looking to be out the door within 30 to 60 days. I know $90 has already been spent on some staff issues, but Representative Pulowski's intent, and he told me I could say that on the record, is to move this bill.
We have the amendment before us.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
to the amendment, as I would if we were sitting across from one another in room, whatever it is, in the Senate office building, I would ask the chair if she'd like to proceed with this amendment before we move it along, or I would just ask if she's okay with the amendment.
You're directing the question to the chief author, not to the chair. Senator Rosen, could you
Thank you,
give us
Mr. Chair and Senator Ingebrigtsen. Yes, I am good with the amendment. I have paused to think about Senator Latz's concern of the 3 and more, And I would like to just get a verification from Mr. Backus, if possible.
Mr. Backus.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Senator Rosen, what's the question? I mean, as Senator Latz pointed out, the term civil disorder as defined does have the requirement that it be 3 or more persons. I guess, I think the way I would look at this, though, is that the bill, if it was amended that way, would clearly say that disasters don't include civil disorders as defined. So I think then you'd have a situation where perhaps if you had 1 person or 2 people doing it, I think then it would probably presumably be up to the governor. I think the governor could declare a disaster then if the governor wanted, because the governor wouldn't be precluded from doing it, but the governor wouldn't have to. At least that's, I believe, what could happen there.
Senator Rosen.
Yes, in that case, Mr. Chair, I'm good with the amendment. Thank you.
All right. The amendment is before us. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The amendment carries and is adopted. We have the bill before us. Do we have a motion?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Senator
As amended.
Senator Ingebrigtsen, thank you for the assistance, Senator Bingham. Senator Ingebrigtsen moves Senate File Number 7 as amended, be recommended to pass and move to the floor. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
No. No.
Chair's in doubt. Those in favor, raise your hand or put your hand in front of the screen. Okay. Opposed? The amendment or the motion carries. The bill passes as amended. There's no further business before this committee. We stand adjourned. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members.